Stephanie Seymour seemed to come out of the supermodel era with almost everything intact. Her career survived the 1990s. Fashion still wanted her decades later. She married publishing magnate and art collector Peter Brant, raised a family, and lived inside a world of extraordinary wealth. Getting there had been far messier. Her relationship with Axl Rose ended with lawsuits from both sides. Her marriage nearly collapsed in a divorce battle filled with accusations, police reports, and fights over custody and property, before the couple reconciled. Then, in January 2021, something happened that made those earlier scandals feel strangely small. Their 24-year-old son, Harry, died after an accidental overdose of prescription medication. Seymour had survived decades of public conflict. This was a loss that offered no settlement, reconciliation, or way back. Stephanie Seymour grew up in Poway, in San Diego County, far from the fashion capitals that would later define her career. She began modeling locally in her early teens before entering Elite's Look of the Year competition. After winning her regional round and reaching the finals, she caught the attention of an agency that could take her far beyond California. In the summer of 1984, Elite sent Seymour to New York and then to Europe for work. She modeled in Paris and Rome, where the agency even held a 16th birthday party for her, before she returned home to start high school. That return did not last long. After one semester at Poway High School, Seymour moved to New York in early 1985. She was 16. Her parents agreed on the condition that she continue her education through correspondence courses and stay in regular contact with home. The move also changed the rhythm of her education. Schoolwork had to fit around castings and travel, leaving Seymour to manage teenage academic requirements, alongside a schedule that already looked much closer to full-time employment. New York placed her inside a much larger professional world. Castings came more often, the clients were bigger, and travel could be arranged with little warning. Seymour was still young enough to need her parents' permission to live there, but once she was on a job, she was expected to keep pace with everyone else. In 1986, Mademoiselle put her under contract. Seymour later recalled averaging around 20 pages an issue for several months, much of it swimwear and sportswear. The steady bookings gave her something a young model needed almost as much as a memorable face: repeated exposure to editors and photographers who could hire her again. By 19, she was no longer the teenager hoping a modeling contest might lead somewhere. She had already worked in Europe, secured a magazine contract, and become familiar to people inside the industry. The next step would make her familiar to millions more. Once Seymour settled into New York, her work spread across sportswear, swimwear, lingerie, beauty, and editorial shoots. Each job called for something slightly different, and she became good at adjusting without losing the look that made clients remember her. That range helped her. She could appear soft and approachable in one photograph, then more polished or glamorous in another. It made her useful to different kinds of clients and gave her more ways to keep working. The people around her controlled most of what happened on set. Photographers, stylists, editors, and agents decided how the finished image should look. Seymour's job was to understand what they wanted and deliver it quickly. There was also very little separation between being a teenager and being treated like a professional. Shoots could run long, travel could come with little notice, and the finished photographs often made young models appear older and more self-assured than they actually were. By 17, Seymour was already moving regularly between magazine work, catalogs, and overseas assignments. Mademoiselle kept her visible, while each new booking introduced her to more people who could hire her again. The career was growing through steady work, rather than one sudden breakthrough. Over time, she became more confident in front of the camera. She learned how small changes in posture, expression, and movement could completely alter a photograph. That skill allowed her to work with photographers who wanted very different things from her, from youthful simplicity to the more glamorous image that would later become closely associated with her. By the end of her teens, Seymour had moved well beyond the stage of simply trying to find work. She had built enough experience and recognition inside the industry that bigger opportunities were beginning to follow. Before long, her face would move from regular magazine pages to some of fashion's most important covers. In March 1988, Seymour appeared on the cover of American Vogue. She was 19. By then, she had already spent several years working steadily, but Vogue placed her in a different category. Catalogs and commercial campaigns could keep a model busy and well paid. A major Vogue cover signaled that the fashion industry saw something more in her. The timing worked in her favor. Models were beginning to become celebrities beyond the runway and magazine page. Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, Christy Turlington, Claudia Schiffer, and several others were becoming recognizable to people who barely followed fashion. Seymour entered that same era as her own profile continued to rise. Her career expanded quickly. She appeared in Sports Illustrated's swimsuit issue, worked for major fashion and beauty clients, and was photographed by some of the most important names of the period. Richard Avedon became closely associated with her early success, while Peter Lindbergh and Herb Ritts helped shape the more glamorous image that followed her into the 1990s. Victoria's Secret brought her to an even wider audience. Seymour appeared frequently in the company's catalogs years before the televised fashion shows, and elaborate angel imagery became central to the brand. When Victoria's Secret held its first runway show in 1995, she opened it. As the company later developed the angel identity around a small group of recognizable models, Seymour became closely associated with that early generation. Her work with Victoria's Secret could easily have pushed her into a narrow commercial lane, but her high-fashion career continued alongside it. Designers, magazines, and beauty brands still booked her, allowing her to move between polished editorials, glamorous campaigns, and runway work without being defined by lingerie alone. That range helped Seymour move between high fashion and commercial work without losing credibility in either, which gave her unusual staying power as her profile grew well into the early 1990s. Her earnings showed how valuable that range had become. A 1988 Los Angeles Times profile described rates reaching as high as $10,000 a day, although Seymour gave a lower estimate of her annual income than the figures promoted by her agency. Even with that difference, she was clearly earning at a level few young models reached. By the early 1990s, Seymour no longer needed anyone else's fame to explain why the public knew her name. She had Vogue, Sports Illustrated, Victoria's Secret, major campaigns, and photographers who helped define the period. Her relationship with Axl Rose would expose her to an entirely different audience, but she entered that relationship with an established career already behind her. Seymour began dating Guns N' Roses frontman Axl Rose around 1991, as the band entered its Use Your Illusion era. Their relationship quickly drew attention from both fashion and music media, placing one of the era's most recognizable models beside one of rock's biggest frontmen. She appeared in the band's Don't Cry video before taking the central female role in November Rain. Released in 1992 and directed by Andy Morahan, the video was produced on an unusually large scale, with a budget of about $1.5 million. At the time, that placed it among the most expensive music videos ever made. The story moves between a concert performance and an elaborate wedding sequence. Rose's character marries Seymour's character, and later the same bride appears in a coffin during a funeral. The video never clearly explains what happened to her, leaving much of its emotional impact to the images themselves. Seymour had no dialogue, but the role still placed her near the emotional center of the video. Her performance depended almost entirely on expression and visual presence, skills that translated naturally from years of modeling in front of still cameras. Seymour's wedding look became closely tied to the song, and November Rain went on to become one of the defining videos of the MTV era. Decades later, it passed 1 billion views online, introducing the performance to generations who had never seen its original television run. Away from the camera, the relationship was becoming increasingly unstable. News coverage often described Seymour and Rose as engaged, although Seymour later disputed that description, while Rose spoke about the relationship differently. Whatever label they used, the relationship ended in 1993. The breakup soon became more serious than celebrity gossip. What had once been covered through fashion shoots, premieres, and music videos shifted into a legal dispute involving accusations from both sides. That legal fight would permanently complicate the romantic image created by November Rain. The video remained unchanged, but the relationship behind it had ended in a way audiences could no longer understand through the screen alone. In August 1993, Rose filed a civil lawsuit against Seymour in Los Angeles. He accused her of assaulting him during an argument and demanded the return of jewelry he said belonged to him. Seymour rejected his account and filed claims of her own, accusing Rose of physical abuse during their relationship. Seymour's lawyers later subpoenaed Rose's former wife, Erin Everly, as they prepared her case. Everly would later bring a separate civil action against Rose, adding further scrutiny to allegations involving his behavior in past relationships. Everly's involvement widened the case beyond two former partners. Her expected testimony gave Seymour's lawyers another way to examine Rose's behavior in an earlier relationship, though it ultimately did not determine whether Seymour's claims were true. The dispute also involved expensive jewelry, including pieces Rose valued at more than $100,000. Neither side's claims were tested at trial. The case ended privately, leaving no court finding that Seymour assaulted Rose or that Rose abused Seymour. And the terms of the resolution were never made public. For years afterward, Seymour said relatively little about Rose. That changed in a 2014 Harper's Bazaar interview. When November Rain began playing during the shoot, she called getting involved with him clearly a mistake. She also described him as a violent person, and said the experience had made her want to stay away from that world. Those comments gave a clearer sense of how Seymour viewed the relationship decades later. The court case had ended without a verdict, but her own opinion of the experience was no longer ambiguous. By then, her life looked very different from the period captured in the Guns N' Roses videos. She had continued modeling, married Peter Brant, and raised a family while the Rose relationship gradually became part of her past. That next chapter had actually begun in 1993, the same year the lawsuit was filed. Seymour became involved with Brant, a publishing and industrial figure whose life revolved around business, contemporary art, polo, and extraordinary wealth. The relationship would become the longest of Seymour's adult life. She and Brant would marry, have children, and spend years inside New York and Connecticut society. More than a decade later, their marriage would face a legal crisis of its own. Seymour met Peter Brant in 1993. He was about 20 years older and still married to his first wife, Sandra Sims, with whom he had 5 children. Seymour and Brant began a relationship, and their first son together, Peter Brant II, was born later that year. Brant's first marriage ended before he and Seymour married. Their wedding took place in France in 1995, at an estate outside Paris. Azzedine Alaya gave Seymour away, and Naomi Campbell served as maid of honor. The ceremony reflected Seymour's fashion connections, while marriage introduced her more deeply to Brant's world of publishing, contemporary art, polo, and business. The couple eventually had 3 children together, Peter II, Harry, and Lily. Seymour also had an older son, Dylan, from her brief marriage to musician Tommy Andrews. As the family grew, motherhood became a larger part of how she appeared publicly. Brant had a substantial profile of his own. His business interests included newsprint and publishing, and over the years he built a major contemporary art collection. The family's Greenwich estate became known for its size and for the artworks displayed across the property. Seymour continued modeling, but with far more control over her schedule than she had during her early career. She could return for a campaign, magazine shoot, or runway appearance without maintaining the constant pace that had defined her teens and 20s. Her children occasionally joined her in that work. A Gap campaign featured Seymour with them, briefly bringing family life into the commercial image that had followed her for years. Through much of the 2000s, Seymour and Brant appeared settled. They moved through fashion, art, and New York society as an established couple, while their children grew up around the same circles. That public stability would not last. By 2009, problems inside the marriage had reached the point where lawyers became involved, and a private family conflict was about to become a highly public divorce case. Divorce proceedings began in Connecticut in March 2009, and the conflict quickly became public. Seymour and Brant were fighting over custody, money, property, and who could remain in the family home, while serious accusations from both sides began appearing in the press. Brant's lawyers raised concerns about Seymour's use of drugs and alcohol and asked the court to order treatment. Seymour challenged those claims. Both spouses underwent random testing during the case, and later hearings showed that Seymour had tested negative, while lawyers continued arguing over missed appointments and access to medical records. Seymour, meanwhile, described Brant in court filings as hostile, threatening, and intimidating. She sought to have him removed from their shared home and raised concerns about the security surrounding the property. During one confrontation, a security guard working for Brant was arrested after an altercation with Seymour. Prosecutors later declined to pursue the charge, and a related civil case was dismissed. Another dispute began after Seymour discovered a GPS device beneath a vehicle and went to police. Officers told her they could not bring charges because the vehicle was registered to Brant. The incident quickly reached the tabloids and became one of the stranger details attached to an already bitter divorce. The amount of money involved made the case even harder to ignore. Court records valued Brant's assets at close to $490 million and placed his monthly income at roughly $1.5 million. While the proceedings continued, a judge ordered him to pay Seymour $270,000 a month in alimony and support for their children. Their art collection and jewelry became part of the dispute as well. Seymour and Brant each accused the other of removing or controlling valuable property, including works by major artists. With custody, the family home, and hundreds of millions of dollars involved, almost every new filing offered another detail for newspapers to follow. For 18 months, the case appeared to be moving toward a courtroom showdown. Then, in September 2010, Seymour and Brant appeared in court together and withdrew the divorce action. They announced that they were reconciling and asked for privacy as they tried to repair the marriage. Because the divorce ended there, the court never delivered a final judgment on many of the accusations that had filled the proceedings. Seymour and Brant remained married and gradually returned to public life together. After the reconciliation, the family gradually moved out of the headlines. As the children grew older, Harry began attracting attention on his own. Harry Brant was born in 1996 and grew up inside the fashion and art circles that surrounded both of his parents. By his teens, he was already appearing at major events and developing a style that made him easy for fashion publications to notice. At 16, Harry attended the 2013 Met Gala in an embroidered Saint Laurent jacket with dark eye makeup. He often appeared alongside his older brother Peter, and the two became familiar enough in New York fashion coverage to be known simply as the Brant brothers. The appearance placed Harry inside one of fashion's most closely watched social settings while he was still forming his public identity. The attention around his clothes and makeup showed how quickly personal style could become part of his reputation. Harry soon turned that visibility into work of his own. He modeled for Balmain, appeared in Italian Vogue, and contributed writing to Interview, the magazine owned by his father. That gave him a place both in front of the camera and behind the scenes, where he could write about the same culture he had grown up around. Beauty became one of his strongest interests. Harry and Peter collaborated with MAC Cosmetics on makeup collections aimed at a younger audience that was becoming less interested in strict gender rules around cosmetics. Their first collaboration arrived in 2015, followed by a larger collection the next year. Harry spoke openly about makeup as something anyone should feel free to wear, which matched the way he approached his own style. The cosmetics partnership also gave Harry and Peter a project they could shape together, rather than appearing in coverage simply as members of the Brant family. His social life kept him visible as well. Harry attended fashion shows, gallery openings, parties, and dinners across New York, often moving through the same rooms that had been part of his parents' world for years. Some profiles focused heavily on the family's wealth and treated the brothers as symbols of young New York privilege. Harry seemed aware of that image and often played with it through clothes, humor, and an exaggerated sense of style. People who knew him also described someone with a serious interest in art, books, film, fashion, and beauty. Growing up around photographers, designers, editors, and artists had given him a familiarity with those subjects that went deeper than simply appearing at fashionable events. By his early 20s, he had begun building several possible directions for himself. Modeling gave him visibility. Interview gave him room to write about culture. His work with MAC allowed him to turn his ideas about beauty and self-expression into something people could actually buy and use. From the outside, Harry appeared confident, connected, and comfortable inside the world he had inherited. At the same time, he had been dealing with addiction for years. His family kept much of that struggle private while he was alive, and only after his death did they explain how seriously he had been trying to recover. Those accomplishments became important after his death, when addiction threatened to dominate the way his life was remembered. Harry had already worked in fashion, written about culture, helped create beauty products, and built relationships across the industry. He had established a public identity that extended beyond his parents' names alone. The Brant family had already suffered a major loss before Harry's death. In 2019, Peter Brant's eldest son from his first marriage, Ryan Brant, died at 47. Ryan had founded the video game company Take-Two Interactive, and his death was attributed to cardiac arrest. Less than 2 years later, Harry was preparing to return to treatment. His family said he had struggled with addiction for years and was only days away from re-entering rehab. On January 17, 2021, Harry died after an accidental overdose of prescription medication. He was 24. Stephanie Seymour and Peter Brant released a statement soon afterward. They said Harry had wanted to overcome his addiction and had been working toward recovery. Their message centered on the person they had lost, describing him through the roles he held inside the family and the friendships he had built beyond it. Tributes soon came from people across fashion and media who had watched Harry grow up. Friends and colleagues remembered his humor, curiosity, and fearless approach to clothes and makeup. His work with MAC, his writing for Interview, his modeling, and his appearances at major fashion events all returned to public view as people looked back on the life he had been building. Harry had grown up with extraordinary access, but he had also developed interests and relationships that were distinctly his own. Fashion and beauty gave him a place to express himself, while addiction remained a serious private struggle that his family had been trying to help him overcome. For Seymour, the loss carried a different weight from the public conflicts that had followed her for years. Lawsuits had legal endings. The divorce case had ended in reconciliation. Careers could survive headlines and move forward once the attention faded. Harry's death offered none of that. In the months that followed, Seymour said very little publicly about him. When she eventually began speaking about Harry again, she focused on the parts of him she could still keep close. His clothes, photographs, and familiar objects became ways of remembering him without repeatedly returning to the circumstances of his death. That response fit a life spent around images in an unexpected way. Seymour had spent decades being photographed, styled, and interpreted by people who only saw the finished result. After Harry died, she seemed far less interested in giving the public a complete picture of what grief looked like inside her family. She and Brant remained together. The homes, art, wealth, and career that had once defined so much of Seymour's public life were still there. None of them changed what had happened. The family had survived years of conflict and scrutiny, yet this was the loss that remained long after the headlines moved on. For a long time after Harry died, Seymour kept most of that grief private. When she spoke about him publicly in 2023, she described small ways of staying close to him. She kept his clothes and sometimes wore them. In photographs for WSJ magazine, she put on a Saint Laurent suit that had belonged to Harry. She said wearing his clothes still felt good. She also kept a locket with his photograph and talked about making choices she believed Harry would have loved. The gestures were personal and practical, giving her something tangible to hold on to without turning grief into a public performance. Seymour continued modeling. In 2019, 2 years before Harry's death, she closed a Versace show after a long absence from the house's runway. Vogue treated the appearance as the return of a woman still closely associated with the brand's supermodel years. In 2023, she appeared on a Vanity Fair Italia cover as part of a portfolio of major models from different generations. Her place in fashion had survived. She remained wealthy, married to Peter Brant, recognizable to the public, and connected to the industry that made her famous. None of that fits a literal story about a woman who lost everything. She entered modeling as a teenager and reached a level of success few models ever touch. Her relationship with Axl Rose ended in accusations from both sides and a private resolution. Her marriage to Brant nearly ended in an 18-month court fight before the couple reconciled. Each episode created headlines, then eventually moved into the past. Harry's death did not. The earlier scandals had already passed into history by then. Harry's death remained present in a different way, returning through the clothes Seymour kept, the photographs she carried, and the memories she chose to share. Nothing Seymour had built could change what her family was carrying forward. When Seymour later wore his clothes, the gesture carried a different kind of meaning from the fashion images that had defined most of her life. For decades, clothes had been part of her work, photographed, styled, and sent into the world for strangers to judge. Harry's clothes stayed close to home. Wearing them gave her a way to carry part of him forward without asking the public to understand the loss. That may be the clearest way to understand what changed. Seymour still had the career, the name, the marriage, and the life she had built. What she could not get back was the person she wanted beside her inside it.